Craving fresh, made-from-scratch Mexican food that actually tastes homemade? Cafe Rio's got you covered. Every tortilla is hand-rolled, every sauce is slow-simmered, and every bite is bursting with bold flavor. Hungry yet? Don't wait. Order now at CafeRio.com. Build your burrito, salad, or tacos exactly how you like them, and we'll have it ready hot, fresh, and fast. Whether it's lunch on the go, dinner with friends, or a full-on fiesta at home, Cafe Rio always brings the flavor and the fun. So what are you waiting for? We've got you covered. Savor the flavor and order now at CafeRio.com.
You're listening to the Utah Checkdown Podcast. And now your host, Josh Furlong.
Welcome back to another edition of the Utah Checkdown Podcast. I am Josh Furlong. Happy to be back with you again this week. Unfortunately, I took a week off last week, and I'm sorry for that. As I said before the UCLA game, I was using that as an extended trip with my family to go down to San Diego, and then by the time I got back, got sick, didn't feel very well, and so unfortunately we didn't get a chance to do a recap of that game. Obviously an exciting game. There's a lot of fun that was had there. It was fun to be able to see Utah with an offense again. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to recap that. So we'll get some of that today, but we're mostly going to spend some time talking about some other stuff. So with that, let me just tell you a little bit about this episode. Today, we're going to do a little update on the AP Top 25 rankings, a game time announcement, a recap of the Cal Poly and some of the UCLA game, and a little grading session. So with that, we're gonna jump into it because we got a lot to talk about. The season is fully on hand. And, we finally get to talk some games, which I've said has been the most exciting part finally to come up. So before I do that, let me tell you about our partners, Cafe Rio. Craving fresh, made-from-scratch Mexican food that actually tastes homemade? Cafe Rio's got you covered. Every tortilla is hand-rolled, every sauce is slow-simmered, and every bite is bursting with bold flavor. Hungry yet? Don't wait. Order now at CafeRio.com. Build your burrito, salad, or tacos exactly how you like them, and we'll have it ready, hot, fresh, and fast. We've got you covered. Savor the flavor, and order now at CafeRio.com. All right, we're going to just jump right into this because, I don't want to waste your time. On Sunday, the AP Top 25 rankings came out, and Utah jumped up 5 spots from where they were last week after the UCLA game at 25 to number 20. Now, that seems kind of odd considering that Utah played an FCS team. It's not one of those games that usually moves the needle all that much because everybody should be blowing out FCS opponents. But at the same time, Utah moved up 5 spots. And you can factor in some of that with teams around them losing and all that. But I think it honestly was just a bunch of the voters realizing that they should have had Utah higher, should have had them in the poll to begin with for some people. And so I think you saw kind of a correction in week 2 in terms of where Utah was ranked. Some people have Utah very high. Like I think I've seen them as high as 7. Some have them in the top 10. As you may know that I am a top 25 voter. I don't have them that high. I have them at 16th. Some people will disagree with me at having them at 16th in terms of being too high. And I get that, right? Like it's still not a lot to know, or I should say, we still don't know a lot about this team. I think there's a lot of things that have come of this that show how Utah is. But, the UCLA game, obviously great, and Utah blows them out. But we're seeing that UCLA may not be the greatest team out there. Not that was a big expectation. But I think you kind of have to temper some of these things. The good thing for Utah is that they blew out UCLA, right? It would be more of a concern if Utah had just won by 3 points and then UCLA goes and loses to UNLV. That's a little bit more concern. So I don't think these things are going to have a huge impact on Utah in the sense that some of the teams that they're playing may not be as good as they would hope. Obviously, you want these teams to be better, but at the same time, you blew them out. And so you showed that you handled the team that you should have, and all is good. So like I said, I think this is more of a correction than anything. Utah checks in at 20th, and I think that's a great spot for them. right? Like I don't think anybody should be too upset if they're, where they're at. I understand many have them higher, but at the same time, I think, the fact that you're ranked this point in the season, especially with how bad last season went, just as a sign of respect for Kyle Whittingham and this program to show that, it really was such a down year. Everybody kind of understands that to an extent. There's obviously some voters that are catching up to it and understanding what's going on. The game that was late against UCLA, really hurt, some of that. But at the same time, votes weren't due until Monday. So there really wasn't an excuse for AP voters that didn't have them in or were still hesitant on it. Each person has their own rationale and reasoning for why they don't put a team in. You could look at my ballot and look at some teams that I've had in or haven't had in and question it. So it's always an interesting feat. And, it's honestly like throwing spaghetti against the wall because there's just not really a lot of answers, and it'll all shape out in the end. So Utah's at 20th. They are only one of 3 Big 12 teams, ranked this week. I think the Big 12 has had an interesting 2 weeks. You've had some good wins, and then you've had some losses that just are head scratching, or just not exactly helpful to the conference, so to speak. So it's been different. I think some of these teams that have been talked about in the top, a la Arizona State or Kansas State, they haven't lived up to their billing so far this year. We're only a few games in, so it's not like it's all downhill from here for some of these teams. But it just hasn't been a clean start for some of these programs. And so it's been interesting to kind of see these rankings. Do I think this is indicative of where it's going to be at the end? Maybe, right? I think Iowa State, there's been a lot of love for them, and they're ranked at 14th. I think there's some expectations that they could be okay. Getting a win over Iowa obviously means something, but Iowa literally has no offense. So it's hard to know, is Iowa State actually good? They beat Kansas State, but is Kansas State any good? Those are the questions that you have, and so we'll see what happens there. You then have Texas Tech, who comes in at 21st, so just a spot below Utah. Texas Tech obviously has spent the money. There's no question that Texas Tech is going all in on this season, but at the same time, their first 2 games literally tell us nothing about this team. They've played really bad teams. There hasn't been anything to really show a test for this team. And so it's really kind of hard to know where this team is at. And so there's going to be a lot of projection still for them. Their real true test really doesn't come until they face Utah next week. And so I think you've got 2 teams that many expect to be, in the Big 12 title contention race, but it's just a challenge because you don't really have an understanding of where these teams are at, especially Texas Tech. I apologize if you hear knocking, if you do hear that. For some reason, they're pounding on a wall and ripping something out in the room next to me. So, great situation right now. But, this is kind of the state of the Big 12 right now. I mean, these 3 teams are kind of carrying the conference so far in the early, right? Like, it just hasn't been a good showing. Kansas was starting to look good and then just kind of laid an egg against Missouri late in the game. Arizona State, it hasn't really shown off this year, had some struggles against an FCS team. Then they lose to Mississippi State. Not a great showing. Baylor has some up and downs, right? Like I still think their offense is pretty solid. I think they're a team that you have to respect, but at the same time, their defense hasn't really shown up. And if anything, it's kind of hurt them. They still get the win last week. TCU has looked good. But there's just so much unknown right now, and I think you could pick apart any team, including Utah. You could pick apart any team here and say that they have a lot to address before you can really consider them as a Big 12 title contender. But I think you're starting to see kind of the trajectories of some of these teams where things are starting out well, and assuming that things continue to progress that way, and you get that first adversity and you can handle it well, then I think you're starting to see teams that are making their moves. So, will Utah be included in that? I don't know. We'll see. I think there's only good things to say about Utah right now in terms of kind of the momentum and the trajectory. But as we saw last year, injuries can derail anything, and no team is immune from that. So somewhere out there is knocking wood right now that Utah is not going to be injured, that the fates have flipped and Utah will have a little bit better luck this season in terms of injuries. But, we'll see. We're 2 games in. Utah still has one more game left in the non-conference before we really hit the main part of the schedule. And, by that Texas Tech game or even the week after, once they've played, we're going to know what this Utah team is. Are they serious about contending? Is this a team that has looked good early but is going to, fall back? We're going to see a lot of those things. So really fascinated with that. So, if you're really caring about the AP ranks, that's where we started here. It's important, but at the same time, you've got to back it up on the field. Utah started the season ranked last year and then, was nowhere near with a 5-7 season. So it really doesn't matter. Today, while we were doing the Kyle Whittingham press conference, it was announced that Utah's game against Texas Tech next week will be the big noon kickoff game at 10 a.m. It's in the big noon slate. It hasn't officially been the big noon kickoff game, but that's generally what happens. So you can kind of expect that. There is buzz that there could potentially be game day that day for this game. So you get Utah and Texas Tech at a 10 a.m. game. That's a lot of fun. I know fans don't love that, whether it be with their own kids playing sports or it just being a day game. People love the Rice Eccles night environment, and I get all that. All those things are valid and true, but at the same time, this is a game that is going to be played at 10 a.m. You get put on the Prime Network. You have no excuses for people watching you on the East Coast because this is noon out there. This is the perfect opportunity for Utah. And so you've got to be happy about that. You've got to be able to love that they're on Fox, being able to showcase their brand. This is the second game this year that they'll be on Fox, being able to do that. And so, you take it, right? You take it for what it's worth. You're excited for it. And if Utah shows up and they beat Texas Tech, that only just gives you that much more momentum heading into the year. If not just with national people looking at you, right? Like you have Devon Dampier, who's already, I posted some odds on Twitter yesterday about kind of where he's at in the Heisman race. Now, look, I get it. Like we're week 2. Like the Heisman race is stupid at this point. But at the same time, you're starting to see people kind of coalesce around some people, or the betting odds coalesce around some people because of their projections, who they kind of are. Obviously, mobile quarterbacks get a lot more love than just pocket passers. Not always, but I think you kind of see people move that way. And so with Devon Dampier, there's a lot to like. Now, is he a finished product yet? No. Is he a Heisman contending quarterback right now? I would say no. But you're starting to see those types of things happen. And if he delivers on a national stage against Texas Tech, a team that has been in the media for the last year as kind of the darling of the NIL era and spending, it goes a long way. And so I think these are the things that you kind of have to look at as kind of the marketability of your program. And so, you take the sufferings of having a 10 a.m. game where it's going to be scorching most likely, and, it's going to draw people away because they have sports or whatever that may be with their kids. But in the same vein, you get an opportunity to showcase your product to a much larger audience, and, that can bode well for you, assuming that you step up. We've seen Utah play in some of these game days or some of these big opportunities, and it hasn't always gone well. We won't talk about that Oregon game a couple years ago, but granted, I think Utah's in a much better state than they have been in some of those games, and so it's going to be interesting to see what comes of this. But at the very least, your product is going to be on a national stage, and you get the opportunity to showcase it. And so if that works out for Utah, it's a great publicity opportunity, and if Utah gets that win, the sky's the limit for this team, I'd say, right? I think they're going to be projected to win a majority of their games. If you look at team rankings, they're actually projected to win every single game this year. Is that likely? No. I don't think anybody's out there calling for 12-0. But if you can get those games against a Texas Tech, a team that's expected to contend for the Big 12 title, that only helps you so much. So we'll see what happens. There's a lot to play, but I think things are lining up for Utah for them to be able to have a lot of publicity and success, assuming that they can back it up on the field. And we're going to get into, kind of some of what that has been and why you can be excited about it. But first, let's recap a little bit the Cal Poly game. Look, I get it. These FCS games are not always my favorite. I've been a big proponent of moving the FCS game to a spring game where you still can pay them, bring them in as a kind of a warm up for these programs, and use your second, third string guys, whatever you need to use to be able to get in there and kind of get some live reps, right? No better way to get live reps in kind of a non-risk factor outside of injuries than in spring. And so I think it would be great. We'll see what happens with that. But, for the time being, we've got teams playing. There's so much noise around me. I'm sorry. There's teams playing FCS teams, and Cal Poly was the latest to come to Utah and do that. So Utah beats Cal Poly 63-9. This was not in question by any means. At the same time, this Cal Poly team actually showed up much better than I thought they would be, especially defensively. There was a lot of good things that they did there to try to limit Utah. There were some good things that they did on offense. There's some glance routes that beat Utah at times. The secondary got a little bit. They over pursued a little bit, or they didn't have the eyes in the right spot, and Cal Poly was able to beat them a few times. But at the end of the day, the defense did more of a bend, not break type situation and only allowed 3 field goals. I think that counts as a win. Once again, you get a team that's only about 220 total yards of offense, same as UCLA the week before. And so this is a defense that is really doing well, despite, they're still needing some things that need to be worked on. So a good situation for Utah. In that game, Utah scored 9 touchdowns, no field goals. 8 of those touchdowns were from the offense. Specifically, one of them, the Jonathan Hall interception that, he almost got a pick six. He landed at the 1-yard line. One of the most athletic, crazy plays I've seen, where he essentially just takes the ball out of the QB's hand as he's throwing it and gets tackled at the 1-yard line. But before that, you had Jackson Benny, the guy that I feel like has had a ton of publicity surrounding him. This is a guy that came into the program as a walk-on, a guy that, quite honestly, just didn't really have the makings of what would be a recruitable player, right? Like, there was enough there to show that he was talented, but not enough to really kind of showcase him as a P4 level. And over the last year especially, things have completely changed for him, and Jackson Benny has been one of the biggest standout players in the entire team. Not just on defense, but on the entire team. And he showcased that a lot on Saturday, starting with his pick six. It was a great, read. He jumps the route, gets the ball, and has green grass right in front of him. And Utah, continues their streak of 22 years straight of a pick six in a season. And so, it continues to lead the FBS. It's the longest all-time record in the FBS. Nobody's been close to that. Nobody is close to that. During that stretch, Utah has had 49 total pick sixes. The next closest is Alabama at 45. But it's just kind of a crazy streak that continues. My wife was asking me the other day, she's like, other teams really just don't do this, right? And, it sounds kind of funny, right? Like that some teams just literally don't get a pick six each year. But Utah's found a way. Their defense has found a way where they just continue to get at least one every single year to continue that streak. And it's this badge of honor that the team carries with it. Kyle Whittingham says that they don't talk about it a ton, but at the same time, I guarantee you that's a badge of honor, behind the scenes that they're looking at. And Jackson Benny, kudos to him, a guy that is a Utah native. He comes in here, he's worked his butt off to really make a spot for himself on the team. He's getting starter minutes now. He's showcasing his talent, and when the lights are on, like, he's absolutely living it up to the best of his ability. Had a really standout day, had a ton of tackles, had pass breakups. He was actually one pass breakup away from tying the Utah all-time record in a game. He was everywhere, and quite honestly, there should have been a chance where he had a scoop and score, where he batted down a pass that was a backward pass, went to pick it up, but they blew it dead. The ball, looking back on it, the ball absolutely was thrown backward. But I think he got to it so fast it was hard to see that it was backwards. Either way, I mean, he's just an impact player. You can say it's against Cal Poly, yeah, whatever. But I think this is a guy that is really kind of starting to believe in himself. He's the most unassuming guy. He's this skinny white kid that if you saw him on the street, you probably wouldn't think anything of him. But he comes in there and, he lays the blow. And he's just dynamic in coverage. And he's just been a great asset. And the crazy thing is, he factors in on offense as well. Like we've talked about with Smith Snowden and Lander Barton, there's a belief that he could be one of the better players on the offense as well, just with how talented he can be. So we haven't been able to see a ton of that. There was some of it in the UCLA game. They've lined him up on offense periodically, but I think there's definitely more there to see. It's just a matter of getting him there. But he's living it up. And on Saturday, he graded out as the top defender in PFF for Utah with a 90.3 grade, which if you look at that, those are considered kind of more the elite grades, right? And so anytime you're above 90, that shows a lot. And so once again, you can say, oh, it's Cal Poly. Let's see him do it against, another team. And, I think that's where coaches are obviously going to look. But you're seeing a guy that is really bursting on the scene and really kind of showcasing who he can be. So really fascinated to kind of see his trajectory and kind of where he can be. I'm fascinated to see what he can be on offense, especially since Kyle keeps pointing to him as a guy that they want to highlight in the offense. We've seen a pretty heavy dose of Smith Snowden, not as much this week simply because they didn't need to, but you're seeing a heavier dose of Smith Snowden so far. But Jackson Benny 100% is going to factor into that. So just as kind of a side note, the second best defender on Utah right now, at least in that Cal Poly game, was John Henry Daly. He's shown up in both games this year as your defensive end, one of your defensive ends. He graded out as an 88.2. Kyle had glowing things to say about him today. Just said that he's a guy with incredible motor, a guy that just gives his all every single play. How he practices is how he plays. He's just a guy that is at a high level, and they're really excited about kind of his potential and what he can mean to Utah this year. So really fascinated with him. The fact that he's grading out high shows good for Utah. So looking at this game a little bit, the offense scored 8 touchdowns. So, it's not one of those things where people are worried by any means, but at the same time, it wasn't as crisp as in week one. Week one, it was a full annihilation of UCLA, right? Like Utah did anything it absolutely wanted against UCLA. It was crisp. It was clean. It's not to say it was perfect, but in the same vein, it was, it was everything that Utah hoped it would be against a P4 opponent. Now, you can say some of it was against an FCS opponent, and so guys aren't playing up to that level that they normally would. I don't get that from this team. I'm not saying it's not possible, but I think there was just a couple factors that went into it. Some of it were guys were sick. Kyle specifically mentioned J.J. Buchanan, who they have a lot of love for, was under the weather and wasn't able to factor into the game. There's some of that. There's obviously some rain and some elements there. At the end of the day, though, Utah just wasn't as crisp as they were in week one. Now, is that a telltale sign of what's to come? Maybe. Until it actually happens, it's hard to see, or hard to predict, I should say. But I think it was more of just, the team, maybe especially early, going through the motions more than they were against UCLA. I think you knew you could kind of take things off. You didn't have that same edge that you would against an opponent like UCLA. But in the same vein, this was a team that was incredibly efficient. The offense moved the ball. They did punt a couple times. Fault them for what you want with that. So be it. But this is a team that was incredibly efficient on the offensive side of the ball. Their biggest issue essentially was penalties. They finished the game with 7 penalties for 65 yards. You obviously have to cut those back. Some of these were, on the offensive side, a handful were on the defensive side. But, this is one of those things where if this is a game where it matters a little bit more, you can't have 7 penalties for 65 yards, right? Like you got to clean that up and you got to move on and not make that. But I think the fact that you have a game like this where you weren't as crisp, you weren't as, I wouldn't even call it as effective, but you just weren't at that same level that you were against UCLA and you still win 63-9, shows that this offense can move the ball, right? And that it can be okay. So, you have to be happy with it, but in the same vein, you can't take for granted what has worked in the past will work in the future. And so, we'll see how this team shows up against Wyoming. Wyoming is another bad team on paper, but you go to a venue that they do not like you. They want to be able to be the team that can beat a Power 4 team. All it takes is some crazy bounces or injuries or something happens, and Utah's suddenly in a world of hurt. We saw that last week with some of these games where you just weren't expecting some of these teams to win. Florida goes down to South Florida, and I think South Florida's better than people are giving them credit at times. But you have games like that. You have Ohio that beat West Virginia. You've got these games that just kind of sneak up on people. And the worst thing that could happen to Utah is that they lose to Wyoming, right? That takes a lot of the wind out of the sail, especially a week before Texas Tech. You want to be hitting at a good rate against Wyoming. Now, with that said, look, I get it. There may be a chance that Utah overlooks Wyoming because you do have Texas Tech on the docket. But, given kind of the edge and mentality of this team, I think that that's not going to be their mindset. But we'll see, right? Anything can happen, and it'll be fascinating to kind of see how this goes. And we'll get into Wyoming later in the week a little bit more, kind of talk about them, get them, excuse me, get an understanding of them. Sorry, my sickness is still kind of lingering a bit, but we're going to work through it. So, looking at Devon Dampier, so I know there was a lot of conversations coming into the season about his touchdown to interception ratio. His completion percentage was low. There was obviously a lot of optimism about Devon Dampier, and there's a lot of love for who he was. But there was always this quiet kind of conversations about, okay, but can he do it at the P4 level, and can he be efficient, right? And I think in the first two games, there's definitely been, some efficiency there. He's definitely improved that. You're seeing him develop as a quarterback while still seeing that there's things that he can improve on. Against UCLA, he passed for 84%, so 21 of 25 for 206 yards, 2 touchdowns, had a solid rating of 179.6. He had, 87 yards on the ground on 16 carries and a touchdown. Was really solid that game. That got him 100% on the radar for a lot of these people that may not have seen him at New Mexico and saw what he was able to do against UCLA. But at Cal Poly, it was a much more dialed back or reserved effort, especially in the run game. He only had 4 carries for 25 yards. So I think you saw him appropriately dial it back and not feel like he had to do everything for the team in a game that, he didn't need to, right? There was, he was efficient. He was 17 of 23, so that's 74%. I mean, he's averaging, you got to go do the averages there. I'm not smart enough to do that there, but he threw for 74% this last game, 192 yards, 3 touchdowns, and had a rating of 187.1. Just a solid play. Like I said, there's things that he could improve on, and there's things that you still want to see him make. But I think you see a guy that is just intent on winning, and he's really making that development to be able to find a way to still impact the game with his skill set, but not relying on it as a crutch in the sense that he has to do that, right? Like, there's no reason he needed to run the ball a ton against Cal Poly. He actually took his first recorded sack against Cal Poly. He rolled out, just couldn't beat the defenders on the edge, and he gets sacked. And so he does have 1 recorded sack on the season. But by and large, he's doing what he needs to be able to make it work. Now, with that, some of the things that I noticed that he still needs to improve on, his arm strength still needs to kind of improve. Some of that, especially early, was kind of the wet ball. I don't know how much of that impacted him. Kyle Whittingham said after the game that he just wasn't gripping it the same way that he usually does. That happens. Quarterbacks are allowed to have, some problems and some struggles. With that said, he was efficient. And so you look at that in a lens of, he does have to improve, but it wasn't a situation where he's going to lose a game for you. He did exactly what he needed to. But there's something about going through his progressions. And I think there's some of this where, coming into the season, there was a lot of conversation about his touchdown to interception ratio being 12-12, so 1-1. Not a great situation for him. And we've talked about it many times about how some of those interceptions at New Mexico weren't on him. But at the end of the day, that stat goes for you, right? And so the big focus is going to be making sure that you do not turn the ball over. And he hasn't yet. There's going to come a time when he throws an interception. That's just the nature of it, especially as these games get more difficult. There's going to be an interception come. If he doesn't have an interception this year, that's pretty remarkable. But it's going to come. But for that, he's been efficient. But so you've got that kind of as the context to how he's playing, where you could see some of the progressions that he's making where he's not willing to throw it into the window as much as maybe you saw last year, because he's trying to preserve that consistency, not turning the ball over. And that's going to be something that Kyle Whittingham talks a ton about, in any game, right? Whichever quarterback he has, he wants to make sure that they do not turn the ball over, because turnovers kill you. With that said, I think you need to see Devon kind of step it up a little bit more. He's got to be able to be quick in how he reacts and hit those tight windows. Now, once again, by doing that, you're going to open yourself up to turnover-worthy plays, right? But at the same time, there was a couple times, one that really stuck out to me is I was watching it. It was a Dallin Bentley play. I was actually talking to a media member next to me as it was going through, where I looked at it and I can see the whole field. And so it's nice to be able to have that perspective. I get that it's different as a quarterback, but I could see this entire route for Dallin Bentley developing where he was essentially wide open for a ton of it. The unfortunate thing is Dampier, he was even looking his way at times, but he didn't have, I don't know if it's that he didn't have the belief in himself at the time, but I don't know. I think he was trying for something else, right? Seeing if something else developed. And then later in that actual play, he did throw it downfield to Bentley, but by then the defender was well on him, and it just didn't hit as well. It was a pass that I wouldn't call it ill-advised by any means, but it wasn't as effective as it could have been had he made that throw a little bit earlier. There was another one, it may have actually been in that same play, where as he was looking downfield to go after Bentley, let's say it's the same play, because I can't remember and I forgot to put a note in there. There was, I believe it was Ryan Davis was just completely wide open, up the seam. And it was a good, 20-yard gain, I believe it was. There was a great opportunity for you. And so it's learning to go through your progressions in a way where you can find the open man, but at the same time finding windows that you can attack. And I don't think that Devon is in a spot where he's not going to do that. I think in a game like this especially, you're going to be a little bit more reserved in kind of how you approach it, because you don't need to hit those tight windows. Against Texas Tech, there may be some situations where the separation may not be as easy, and you need to hit those tight windows, and you need to be that game maker to go in there and showcase the talent. You can see that he can do it, right? There's a throw that he made Dallin Bentley for a touchdown in the left corner of the end zone where you can see that there can be some true zip on the ball, and he can place it where he needs to. But it's learning to just go through those progressions in kind of a manner in which you can be, not turnover worthy or turnover prone, but at the same time still kind of be that playmaker and get your receivers the ball. So, we'll see what happens. Kyle Whittingham said there's a natural progression of him getting better. You're starting to see that, and so I think they're doing things to be able to help him not press it a little bit more. At New Mexico, he was just kind of the guy, and so they felt like he needed to make his shots and kind of make his impact known. Whereas at Utah, there's other factors that can go into it where you don't have to be the guy, right? And so I think you'll see some of that and how it changes. But for him to develop as a quarterback, I think that's that next level. They've got a lot in this offense that allows him to be able to have these short passes or, a screen pass, for example, that allows them to be able to move forward and do what they need to. Wayshawn Parker took it back 48 yards, 52 yards, I can't remember, the sixth play of the game on a screen pass. And so it's, there's some design stuff in there to make it easier on him. But I think for Utah to really impact, or the offense to really impact the game more, and it's crazy to say that considering where they've been, But for them to really take it to that next level, they do have to get to those next levels, right? You've got to be able to find your receivers. I'll talk a little bit more in a second about the receivers, but you've got to be able to make them an impact in the game. And I think some of the blame is getting put on the receivers when it isn't always on them. But at the same time, it's a two-part thing, right? Like you've got to be able to have that connection. You've got to get separation. You also have to have a quarterback that can make the tight throw, but do it in a smart way where, you're not risking things. And against Cal Poly, there was no reason to risk that kind of stuff. So after that, though, after his 2.5 quarters of play on Saturday, we got to see Bird Ficklin again. He got garbage reps against UCLA. Didn't really get to see much from him. He got garbage time minutes against Cal Poly, but we got a lot more of it. And, man, you saw a dynamic athlete. You saw a guy that went 4 of 4 for 53 yards. He also had 5 carries for 55 yards and 2 touchdowns. One of those, though, was an incredible play where he stiff-armed the defender, broke another tackle, and then got himself into the end zone for a long run for his first collegiate touchdown. Just a dynamic player. Obviously has another second rushing touchdown that's in there. But the way that he threw the ball, you got to see what everybody was talking about, where he has one of the best throwing motions on this team. And, he's a guy that can be a true game changer for Utah in the background, right? With that said, he's still a true freshman. And so there's not going to be everything at his disposal. And you're not necessarily even going to see him as QB2, according to Kyle Whittingham. He did grade out as a side. He did grade out as the top offensive player from PFF at a 92.3, which is pretty remarkable. Granted, it's late in the game. He limited reps, even though he did take on quite a few snaps. That it's a good body of work. But, you're going to have to see that against more talent. But Kyle talked about today there not really being a shift in who QB2 is right now. I think they still, at least they're saying it publicly, have belief that Isaac Wilson is QB2. And I think they're saying that more in terms of he's got the experience. And obviously some of that experience wasn't great last year. But at the end of the day, he's the guy that, if Devon goes down, he's got the most experience and has understandings of what playing at the D1 level is like. Whereas Bird Ficklin is similar to where Isaac was last year in terms of not having the experience and needing to really just see game reps. That's why you are seeing Bird Ficklin as QB2 in these last 2 games, where in the garbage time minutes, they're trying to trot him out there to kind of see what he can do. Personally, I think this is a QB2 shift. I think Bird Ficklin, it's hard to say that they pull that trigger, but I think the more and more that you see him doing that, especially if Devon goes down for an extended period of time, I think they try their hand at Bird simply because he fits the skill set that Devon Dampier has more than Isaac does. You see a guy that isn't worried about the bright lights. And look, you're getting it in late game situations in a blowout against UCLA. You're getting it in a blowout against Cal Poly. Of course, you're going to have a different mindset and mentality there. But I think, there's something different about Bird that kind of shows some humility, but also confidence at the same time, where he just goes in there and is a playmaker. He's not overthinking. He's just going and doing it. And sometimes as a freshman that gets you in trouble. But so far it's been a good situation, and it fits the skill set that Utah already has with this offense. And so there wouldn't be a ton of change if you had Bird there. I'm not saying that Isaac couldn't be effective with this offense. I think they would scheme it much better to fit him. But I think if you're looking for a long-term solution in terms of having the consistency of a player that is similar to Devon Dampier, Bird Ficklin is that guy. But at the same time, I think Utah has a little bit more built into this offense to take some of that workload off of whomever is at quarterback. If Isaac were to step in, they've got a lot of guys that are coming in that can be effective. There was a lot of wildcat run on Saturday. There's guys that are being used in motion a ton, and I'm going to get into that shortly. But there's a lot of different things that has changed that would help this offense much better than what Isaac had at his disposal last year. So, whoever is at QB2, I don't want to say it doesn't matter, but I think they're not as concerned with that because they feel confident in what they've got. So we'll see what happens there. But yeah. Now let me take a little pause right here to tell you about our partners, Canyon View Credit Union. At Canyon View Credit Union, it's on the house. Close a mortgage and get a free appraisal up to $600. To learn more details or apply, visit canyonviewcu.com. All right, let's do a little grading of Jason Beck as a play caller. The biggest question coming into the season was, is Kyle Whittingham going to give Jason Beck full autonomy of this offense? And I'm curious to see what it moves or shapes into when conference play hits and these games matter a little bit more. But I think the early signs so far are that Jason Beck has full autonomy. I don't get a sense that Kyle is trying to micromanage. I think he's letting him really just kind of live it up the way that he wants to. And there's been a ton of creativity there, right? Last week, we saw some opportunities in jumbo sets with Keith Olsen and Solatola Moiai lining up in the backfield. I would love to see either one of them be kind of like your fullback or a guy that actually carries the ball into the end zone. There's a lot of different creativity there. You've got motion as a massive threat. They use this in so many different plays that it allows them to, have the sweep. You've got an option. You've got more bodies on a screen pass. You've got more bodies to block on a designed run. You've got fake screens. You've got tight ends slipping down the field. You've got all these different things that can be available with these motions. It's not just for the offense to be able to see what the defense is doing. That does help, but there's just so much more about this motion being intentional. It has something there to help. I went back, and I haven't done this for the Cal Poly game, but I did it for the UCLA game. And on that first drive, so just the first drive against UCLA, there were 6 out of the 11 plays where there was motion of some capacity, right? The first one, Wayshawn Parker motions left. He's used as a blocker to get Smith Snowden open for the easy screen pass. Some people were upset at that play because he blocked the defender, said it's not legal. The reason it is legal is because it was behind the line of scrimmage. But it was laid out perfectly, right? Parker just laid himself out there, got the block. Smith Snowden got, 15 yards on the play. And that's the first play that you see from Utah, in this offense. And so what a way to kind of show what that motion can be. Now, it's not going to always work that way. Now, some other plays that they had there, Smith Snowden was motioning right, appeared to be a pass option to him. Another one was Wayshawn Parker motion to the right, out of the backfield. He got an easy dump-off pass behind the line of scrimmage, and then Dampier hits a tight window to Dallin Bentley. That's what it was there. J.J. Buchanan motioned right for a potential screen pass. Dampier sells the fake and then hits Smith Snowden on the left-hand side, the other side of the field, with Caleb Lomu as your big blocker there, and Ryan Davis down the seam looking for a pass just to kind of sell the play. There's a lot of different things, and I could go on with this. I'm not going to go through every single one, but there's a lot of different ways that Jason Beck is using this motion that isn't just to see what the defense is doing. It is intentional. There's a lot of different things, some of it being to dial up plays later in the game. It's really just trying to keep that defense guessing, and Utah has been very effective with that. I'm curious to see this against conference opponents and what it could mean, but right now it's been incredibly effective for Utah, and Utah remains 100% in the red zone this year. They are one of 5 teams nationally to be 100% on touchdowns in the red zone. So it's not like they're 100%, but they're getting, half of those as field goals. Anytime Utah has been in the red zone this year, it has been a touchdown. Now, you contrast that with the last few years, and I didn't pull the numbers for the last few years because, quite honestly, it hasn't been great. That's been the biggest knock on Utah's offenses. Even when they could score, is red zone production just wasn't always there. They'd get to the red zone, and they'd have to kick a field goal, or they just couldn't get it done. There was jokes about this offense, even in the years that Cam Rising was dynamic. Score the touchdown before you get to the 25-yard line or the 20-yard line because you can't do it in the red zone. So for them, 2 games in to be 100% is pretty remarkable. Now that number is going to go down, right? Like Utah's not going to score every single touchdown in the red zone this year. If they do, this is a team that everybody's going to be worried about, because that just doesn't usually happen. But the fact that you can be this efficient, this good, this effective, this early is a great sign. The 4 teams that are tied with Utah for scoring 100% of their touchdowns in the red zone, or being 100% in the red zone, is Arkansas, Old Dominion, Air Force, and Notre Dame. Air Force and Notre Dame, though, have only played 1 game. So, it's a small list, and it's been effective. Now, just to kind of add some of that to this offense, the offense is tied for 4th in FBS in total touchdowns scored, so 15. They're tied for 8th in FBS in points per game at 53. I get the opponents, right? Like, I get it, but you're scoring at a high rate. Devon Dampier said this team scores, and so far they've backed it up. Those numbers are going to go down in conference play, and if not, once again, look out for Utah. If you're averaging 53 points a game, that's not going to happen. But if you're doing anywhere near that, if you're averaging 40 points a game, you're quite honestly a national title contender potentially. That's just honestly what those numbers are, especially if you have the defense that Utah has. Don't get it twisted. I'm not saying Utah is a national title contender. There's a long way to get before anything like that is possible. But if you're putting up those types of numbers, you're in that conversation, I'll say. Also effective is their 3rd down offense. They're 1st in FBS with a 76.7% completion rate on 30 attempts on 3rd down. They've been incredibly effective there. They've tried 2 4th down attempts, and they're 100% on those. So Utah has been in a situation where they feel confident in what they've got on 3rd and 4th downs. Yes, 4th downs, it's only been 2 times, so it's still not too much. But they've been incredibly efficient that way. And so just from those standard stats alone, you have to grade this offense as pretty effective for Jason Beck, right? It's going to get much harder. Like, we all understand that. UCLA and Cal Poly aren't 2 teams that are going to be considered at the top for Utah this season. I actually looked at the SP Plus today, and if I remember right, UCLA is ranked 82nd in the country. Cal Poly is 222nd when he extends it that way. I mean, these are teams that just aren't going to be that solid. But in the same vein, you're being an efficient team in that. There's years past where Utah has still not been efficient in games like that against lesser opponents, and so to be able to have this is a good telltale sign that this could move forward as the season develops. So, you saw that last year with New Mexico. Jason Beck brought them to the number 4 offense in the country. I think you're seeing a similar result right now with this Utah team, where if you can scheme it the right way, I think Utah can get it done. They're not going to be the team that's going to blow you away over the top. They're not going to be this air raid team that puts up 400 yards of offense through the air. It's a team that has been pretty well balanced, quite honestly. They're throwing for about 200 yards a game and getting almost 300 yards rushing. It's been effective, and you're seeing a balance in kind of the way that Kyle Whittingham would like it seen or run. And so I don't think that there's really any problems right now with Jason Beck's offense. There's going to come some adversity, right? There's going to cause there's going to be some problems that they have to address. There's going to be teams that take away some of this stuff. And quite honestly, if a team is able to take away a lot of Utah's run game, then you have to be a little bit concerned, right? What can Utah do in the passing game? It hasn't really developed there yet. They've got talent, and I still don't think we've seen the full potential there. I think Utah has still kind of held some stuff back. But at the same time, if a team is able to take away that run game, what does this Utah offense look like? What can this offense be? Can Jason Beck be effective as a play caller? I think he can, but I think we haven't quite seen that yet. And so I'm really curious to see that level of it. So even though we can grade Jason Beck as, pretty high, an A-type grade right now, there's still so much to learn about it and what he's able to do. With that said, though, I think you're seeing a true belief that his offense can be effective. And, you've got a scheme that absolutely suits this team, and it works. So, all good so far. I think, Utah feels comfortable with where they're at. they're scoring a lot of points. They're efficient. What more can you ask for? There are things that need to be cleaned up, right? Like we talked about that. The penalties, obviously, you've got to start out a little bit more crisp than you were last week. But this is a team right now that has true belief in themselves. They feel like they can do whatever they need to. The offensive line, even holding out guys like Jaren Kump or mixing in some other depth pieces, that line still handled it pretty well and was pretty effective. So, you have to like where Utah is there. Now, with that, the next biggest question here, is the wide receivers, right? There's the question of, are these wide receivers any good? Has Utah utilized them? Is this the game plan that Kyle has for them? Is this why Utah has utilized a guy like Smith Snowden or Jackson Benny or Lander Barton on the offense because they don't have the skill sets to do it? I think it's still TBD, right? And if I'm looking at this, I don't quite feel like we have a definitive answer on either yet. Yes, more guys need to step up, right? Kyle says they still need more production. They need to get the ball down the field more. But at the same time, I think there's been a combination of Utah has really honed in on the run game. And also Devon Dampier, as I've mentioned earlier, needs to go through his progressions a little bit better to make sure that he keeps his head upfield. He sees the receivers. They need to get some separation. But in the same vein, there are some separation that is there, right? Dampier just needs to get it to them. So, it's a combination of the things. I don't know that we have a good answer yet. Obviously, the fact that you haven't gotten them as involved yet kind of shows that maybe there needs to be a little bit more progress made. But I don't know that you can fully say yet where Utah's at. Guys like Tobias Merriweather can be effective. J.J. Buchanan can be effective, although he was sick, and we saw that. You've got a lot of tight ends that are being featured in that can be a factor there. Ryan Davis is really showcasing himself as a receiver and a guy that has Devon Dampier has a lot of trust in because of his time with him last year. I think it just takes some time, and there's going to be some development. You can talk about all the offseason, progress that these teams made and the connections and the consistency that they had together in the offseason. But all that kind of gets thrown out the window once the games are played. You now have to do it on the field, especially when you've got defenses that are going to do things differently, trying to mix it up. If Utah can be effective in this passing game, though, I think everything will be at their disposal. As I mentioned just previously, if a team can take away the run or whatever that means, limit it in a way where they can't scheme it the same way that they have, let's say, against UCLA or Cal Poly, that really forces Utah to be effective in the passing game. But if Utah can get that area already fixed, I wouldn't call it fixed, but if they can make that a little bit more prominent in their game, that really puts some stress on the defense to be able to make sure that they have to respect it, right? And that really allows Dampier to work even more efficiently because now they can't completely load up the box and force you to, pass it. They now have to respect that pass. And now when you respect the pass, you don't know if he's going to, throw on the run. You don't know if he's going to, option play or run it himself or give it to Wayshawn Parker and Akari Rogers. Like there's a lot that they can do there. And so for Utah to be successful this year, I think they have to find some level of production in the receiving game. Doesn't have to be their full receivers, right? Like obviously you need Tobias Merriweather, Larry Simmons, Ryan Davis, those types of guys to step up. But if you can get it done with Smith Snowden, Lander Barton, Jackson Benny, your tight ends, Dallin Bentley, who has been really effective this year, Hunter Andrews, I can list a whole bunch of guys. Like they've got the guys there. I think it's just a matter of utilizing him the right way. I think you're going to see Jason Beck kind of evolve a little bit in how he uses that. For all the conversations of Beck not using a tight end last year much, you're seeing a lot more involvement in the tight ends. And I think you're just going to give whoever has the hot hand the ball. And so I don't know that it's a huge concern yet, but it's definitely one that we're going to continue to monitor as the season develops. And then lastly, just kind of grading out the run game. I mean, this is a 1-2 punch right now with Wayshawn Parker and Akari Rogers. Wayshawn has been a little bit more effective all around, just in terms of production. They're similar in the sense that they have similar yardage, but Wayshawn has been just a little bit more productive, and meaning getting, his average has been a little bit higher. For example, against UCLA, he rushed for 62 yards on 11 carries, so that's 5.6 average. He got a touchdown. McCary Rogers got 61 yards, so just a yard shorter, but on 16 carries for 3.8 yards on average, and he also got a touchdown. So they're similar, but right now Parker has been a little bit more efficient. That carried over in the Cal Poly game. Granted, Parker had a run of 48 yards on a rush for a touchdown. So, a lot of those yards that he had are going to be skewed a bit. He finished with 50 rushing yards on 6 carries for an 8.3 average, but one of those came as 48. So, there wasn't – those numbers can lie, I'll say. Rogers, meanwhile, was 31 yards on 7 carries, and he had 2 touchdowns. So, I still think these two are effective as a 1-2 punch. Kyle Whittingham today said that there's no real reason to try to find a featured back when you have 2 effective guys. If it develops that way where they have a guy that separates himself, they'll go with it, but they feel confident that they've got 2 guys that they can utilize. But he also mentioned that they've got guys like Nate Johnson, Hunter Andrews, Smith Snowden, Jackson Benny. There's a whole other bunch of players that I can mention in there that they're utilizing in the run game. So, it's not just quite Parker and Rogers that are being utilized. It's going to be a whole arsenal of players, and that's not even including Devon Dampier. But there's a whole arsenal of players that are going to be factored into that. So, really, really curious to see how this goes. I think by and large, everything is on the up for this Utah team. You have to like what they're doing right now. Obviously, they're 2-0, and, they're seemingly healthy right now. They've been able to be efficient and effective. There's going to be some adversity that they face here soon, but at the same time, in the early signs, this is a team that has been effective, and that's all you can really ask for. And so I think, you have to grade this team out at a high level right now, knowing that they're still not at their peak level. But considering some of these teams that we've seen in the Big 12 this year already kind of going through some struggles, you have to like where Utah's at. Regardless of the opponent, they've been able to be effective. And that's all you can ask for at this point. So, a good spot for them to be. So we're going to end the podcast there. We'll come back again later this week to do a preview on Wyoming, kind of talk about that game, what that means. Is it a potential trap game? Is this a game where Utah has any worry of losing? Why is this game scheduled? We've talked about this before, but we'll get into all that kind of stuff. But I appreciate you checking in with me on a Monday. Hopefully you're having fun as a Utah fan right now, that football is back and it is good, and that you're not suffering through 3 and outs and watching a defense on the field for majority of the game. So with that, we're going to sign out today, and we'll talk to you guys later.